of humans and the suffering of humans, well, then that's not a world that's recognizably ours, because in our world, people do things for their benefit. But there is no benefit when Satan's doing things because he's just making humans suffer. So once again, we're denying the material roots of actions and creating this eternal being to come down and determine our lives for us. So I'm getting now to my absolute favorite period of conspiracy theory history, the greatest, the golden age. I will not hear anyone else argue otherwise. You can spare me with your kitschy John Waters-esque 50s Red Scare shit. Even the Satanic Panic, I tip my hat to that's particularly just grand Ghoulian ghoulishness on TV every day. I mean, amazing. But to me, nothing beats the 90s. Tinfoil hats at the end of history. This is where conspiracy theory as culture came into its own. Because the 90s were, as I have said before, the last decade in American history. We don't have decades anymore. It's just a smear of things happening. Differentiation has been abolished by the speed of capital acceleration. We're just falling towards the black hole of capital and stretching out. And it all is just blurring together. So the 90s are the last decade. And it was a time when we thought that orderly, sequential time was going to go on forever. It was the triumph of neoliberal capitalism. It was the banishment of all external enemies. The USSR was gone. There was no more bad guy, no wolf at the door, no bear at the door, rather. And that we were in charge of our destinies as Americans and as capitalists and as Christians. And this was all summed up by a phrase uttered by President George H.W. Bush, a dawning of a new world order. And those words just set off like a tuning fork in the heads of millions of mostly white American males, mostly, who felt the walls closing in when they heard that, who felt that actually we are now being corralled. There is no escape from any of these institutions. There's no escape from this present. So that means that we are being caged because we are losing our ability to choose anything other than what is being presented to us. And when you see something like NAFTA happen, where they spent years arguing for it, it was vastly unpopular. It was created by and conceived of by the Bush administration. And then after a contentious presidential election, his opponent wins, Bill Clinton, and then he promptly fucking passes NAFTA. The sense that that's got to create is that, oh, we're not in charge of any of this. This is on rails. And for these guys, especially guys who've been affected by this, maybe laid off by one of these factories relocating, this sense of an ending frontier, this sense of losing that American sense of personal freedom, and of course, this is all tied into white supremacy. I'm sorry. I mean, obviously, this is the frontier mindset of the Manifest Destiny generation. This is the Frederick Jackson Turner go west, Horace Greeley ass idea that this is virgin land for the taking, that every man's right is his right to just set off one day and make his new fortune, and all of that is predicated on land being grabbed and exploited and expropriated from its owners, the native tribes, and then all the value being pulled from that land by enslaved labor, but full freedom for the white man. And that is a thread that goes through American culture to this day. And that sense was being very much threatened by that end of history feeling of the 90s. And so this creates a need to there be a narrative, a dramatic expression of this anxiety of encroaching capitalist hegemony. And so on the ground, you had things like the Michigan militia. You had things like Ruby Ridge and Montana militia. And of course, the fucking granddaddy of them all, Timothy McVeigh, a man who read the Turner Diaries and saw the Waco burnings and saw a government that was controlling every aspect of life and decided he was gonna fight back the way he'd learned to during the battle of during Operation Desert Storm. So that's what's happening on the ground. And then in culture, you see the rise of conspiracy entertainments like the X-Files, which is the definitive program of that decade, really. And in this decade, these cultural expressions of conspiracy mindset are centered around the figure of the alien. The alien has taken the place of the communist or the Jew or the Mason. The alien is the outside force manipulating human life for its own goals. Now, sometimes that is a thinly veiled allegory for Jews, as was the case, with the communists. But for a lot of people, aliens become this avatar of power, the avatar of the supernatural, almost technological and economic power that the governments and corporations of the world hold over you. That is the alien, and that finds its expression in things like X-Files and a bunch of movies about alien abductions that were very popular at that time. And you had folk understandings. This is the decade when words like black helicopter, ideas like crop circles and cattle mutilations, and the fear of FEMA camps all become part of common parlance. We all understand these references because that's conspiracy theory culture making its way into the mainstream. And all this language was created in the 90s by popular culture that fixated on this idea of an alien threat to more Baroque stuff involving reptilians or interdimensional beings or demons in some cases. All of these were expressions of that same anxiety. But this figure, the alien, he represents the important element of conspiracy theory is that it has a source of transcendence. It gives you an idea, a way to transcend this disenchanted world we live in. The same way that in the 80s Satan could. The alien represents a power beyond our understanding, which means the world is not as we see it, which means there is more possibility than we have been given, and that there is a hope for transcendence, that we can be beyond, that this isn't as good as we can make it, that this isn't the only world that exists. And that's what the aliens represent. So this current, which has, it's really a tapestry of stuff. Aliens are one of the big motifs. Government, New World Order stuff is a main motif. But woven within that is just this amazing tapestry of different strains and ideas. The Rosicrucians, the Illuminati, a Bilderberger group, all of these just amazing tales. One guy, William Cooper, wrote this book, Behold a Pale Horse, that wove everything together, all of history, into this massive saga of alien infiltration and takeover of America, of world governmental institutions. And every single conspiracy theory is like a subsection of this greater tale. It's amazing. He would go on to be shot in a shootout with police 2 days after 9/11. So, who knows what that means? Draw your own conclusions. But all of this was powered by books, by radio, and by television. I was talking about X-Files, obviously. I'm talking about early internet websites. And, of course, the two guys that did it. One, Art Bell, who provided this beautiful oral soundtrack of alien abduction stories and tales from Area 51 and all these amazing paranormal firsthand accounts broadcast all night, all across the country. And then on screens, Alex Jones. It's hard to remember that now because he's now basically just a mega water carrier. But in those days, Alex Jones was just an electric mix of conspiracy theories that he just embodied this wholesale repudiation of the settled neoliberal order, or for everything that meant, and it encompassed every element of reactionary and leftist disenchantment with the moment. So he could be everything to everybody because he encompassed all of these tales. And his greatest coup, and the thing that made him, I think it made him. I think it carried him through maybe the lean years of post 9/11 when he kind of had to just market himself as a truther kind of exclusively and limited his audience in a way. It's been his signature achievement. And I think it was what carried him through the lean years till he could become a branded figure like he is now. So one of the parts of the tapestry of conspiracy theory that all underlies these grand narratives of world order and humans being turned into livestock for some great unveiling and some great culling was the little get-together known as a Bohemian Grove. Bohemian Grove is a retreat in Northern California redwoods outside of San Francisco. Every summer, and this has been true since the late 19th century, titans of industry, finance, diplomacy, and government, and technology, and everything. The muckety mucks, who you would think would be in charge of the world, come together for 2 weeks or a weekend of drinking, of sex, and most importantly, connections. The guys give each other little. It was almost like TED Talks before TED Talks, like TED Talks with a child sacrifice. They would just talk about different areas of their expertise to each other and make the connections that lubricate the upper realms of world economic and political power. And they've been doing that for over 100 years. Now, on its face, it's pretty absurd. And brazen. These rich assholes getting together to just, in our face, hash out how the world's going to be divided up. But there's something also sort of banal about that, right? The idea that they can just do that. The idea they can just be like, yeah, we're going to get together. We're even going to tell you we're going to get together. We're going to come out of it and have gotten all of your lives' destinies. We've all swapped them like horses. We have that power over your life. That's kind of a bummer. Nobody wants to hear that. So what Alex Jones did to make Bohemian Grove a narrative that would pop and make him interesting and make people want to listen to him is by saying, no, they don't just get together and hang out and make deals. They are doing satanic rituals involving child abuse, cannibalism, and sacrifice to evil gods. And that is what Bohemian Grove is about. And now you got to admit, that's a much more striking narrative. That's like, oh, wow. You know, it also gives you the idea that this is a movie and you could go in there and like find the evil god and like, you know, say the incantation and throw an amulet at him and he'd explode and go back to his own universe and the world would be saved. You know, there's a narrative there, which means there could be a happy ending as opposed to just this sad, brutal, out in its open expression of domination and confidence in the rule, which is what Bohemian Grove actually is. But the funniest thing is the motherfucker made good on it because he in the late 90s, snuck onto the grounds of Bohemian Grove during the actual weekend with a camera crew and recorded an actual ritual sacrifice. Now, no one was killed, but what actually happened, and this is something that happens at the beginning of every Bohemian Grove get-together, is that there is a giant bonfire put at the base of a 20-foot tall stone owl named Mammon. They call it the cremation of care. And the idea is that they are coming here to have fun and they're burning up all of their troubles. And they're not going to bother them while they're in the woods. Now, the actual origin of this is that Bohemian Grove was created by a bunch of dandy theater folk in San Francisco who wanted to like put on a little fun thing. And it has all, and doing something like that has all the hallmarks of Ivy League fancy boys. It's the kind of shit they love to do over there. They still do. Look at the fucking Hasty Pudding Club, where they all get together and put bras on and giggle. They love that shit. They love the fake dramatic, the amateur dramatics of it. And so the idea of, oh, we're going to burn a fire in front of this stone owl coming down, and oh, it's very droll. Oh, we're having such a fun time. By the way, there's also a fucking talent show at Bohemian Grove at the last night of it, like fucking summer camp. Richard Nixon called it the F-wordiest thing he'd ever seen on the Nixon tapes. But so that's it's an expression of the kind of class they're part of. But of course, regular people don't have those frames of reference. So when they see a sacrifice in front of a stone owl, they see a fucking sacrifice in front of a stone owl. Like, holy shit, these guys are doing ritual shit. They're actually supernaturally connected. They're fucking channeling dark forces to rule over us for the benefit of like the Satan or something. So that made Alex Jones's career. And that sort of narrative was the pervading narrative of the Chris Carter 90s. And all of that kind of went along in this anxiety about, oh, are we being, what's happening? Are we being turned into sheeple? Are we turning into sheeple? Oh, my God. And all of that navel gazing